Good afternoon and welcome back to our final session of day 3 of Real Estate Live UK. For those of you joining us, your first session, Real Estate Live is a week of free virtual events designed to keep the property and regeneration sectors talking, and it's being delivered by White Label with our partners. This session on garden communities, which is about to take place, is being delivered in partnership with the South East Local Enterprise Partnership, Kent Developers Group and Essex Developers Group as part of the new Building Garden Communities for the Future programme. In all our sessions this week, we're looking for as much audience participation as possible, and we've had some fantastic sized audiences, so it's been really positive so far. And to kickstart your engagement, we're opening each session with a poll considering what will be the most important factor in kickstarting development and recovering the strength of UK real estate. And after this session, you may want to click garden community specifically, but that isn't there. But hopefully this session will shed some more light on that too. So that poll will now be live on your screens. And if you could just take a couple of minutes to fill that in, that would be fantastic. So we'll be continuing the participation in this session by asking for further audience engagement and encouraging you to ask as many questions as possible of our panel. You'll see the question and answer feature in your Zoom toolbar, so please use that to put your questions to our speakers. We have fantastic speakers joining us this afternoon to consider how planned garden communities could be used to help stimulate the economy and accelerate delivery post-COVID-19. And I will now hand over to Brian Horton, who is going to be chairing the session this afternoon. Brian.
Yeah, thank you, Bonnie, and thank you to all of you for taking the time this afternoon to join us to talk about or to engage with us on what is a really important issue. I think as we go forward, pre-COVID-19 garden communities are important. I think they're particularly important post. We've got 7 really top-notch speakers. Really grateful to Chris Brodie, the chairman of CLEP, to be joining us. Kevin McGeough, the head of strategy and placemaking at the Ebbsfleet Development Corporation, Nick Fenton, chairman of the Kent Developers Group, hopefully, fingers crossed, Fionnuala Lennon, head of garden communities at Homes England. She should be coming into the call shortly. Guy Nicholson, chair of the Harlow and Gilston Garden Town Board, and Andrew Taylor, head of planning at Countryside. As Bonnie has shared this afternoon, is a focus on the garden communities. The way I'd like to describe it, I suppose, is what good looks like going forward in a post-COVID-19 world. And again, we will be encouraging the interaction, and I hope to manage this in a way so there'll be plenty of time at the end for questions. So without any further faff from me, I'd like to pass over, if I can, to Chris Brodie, the chair of CLEP, to give a CLEP perspective on the garden communities and the particular challenges that we face now coming out of COVID. Thank you, Chris.
Brian, thanks very much. So for those of you who don't know, CLEP is the South East Local Enterprise Partnership, which covers the counties of Essex, Kent and East Sussex. We are the largest LEP in the country in terms of population and GVA. And we're also a major player in the garden communities sector. Of the 49 communities nationally, CLEP has 9 of these, and these include Ebbsfleet, Otterpool Park, North Essex, Dunton Hills, Uttlesford, North East Chelmsford, Borough Green Gardens, Chilmington and Harlow and Gilston. The national total is some 403,000 homes, of which CLEP is going to contribute a third of 134,600. So we are a major player. Accelerating housing delivery has always been a key ambition of CLEP and was a key factor in our Southeast Strategic Economic Plan. And this priority is fed through into our 2019 Economic Strategy Statement and is likely to be very prominent in our emerging local industrial strategy, which we plan to publish later this year. The total number of homes which we have enabled through our LEP supported programs is over 20,000. And to give you an idea of how that has grown, in 2013, 2012-2013, we had 6,620 housing starts and almost 8,000 completions. In 2018-2019, we had 12,200 starts and 11,790 completions. So what we can say is currently that acceleration in housing delivery is clearly under significant pressure from the economic impact of COVID-19 pandemic. Until very recently, there was almost no activity in building, and it's only now just starting to pick up. As far as garden communities are concerned, we feel they do need to be able to evidence an ambition to plan holistically to support new development with the necessary infrastructure. Projects that are demonstrably about placemaking, encouraging well-being, creating employment skills, and a quality of environment to serve a growing population. And our area, we believe, is at the forefront of this programme. And the 5 projects on our patch, Ebbsfleet, Otterpool Park, North Essex, Dunton Hills, and Harlow and Gilston, will equate to 96,500 of the homes nationally. And the government has recently also recognised Uttlesford with a further proposal for 18,000 homes. And where there's also been, last year in February, there was announced successful bids for new funding for Borough Green Gardens, Chilmington and North East Chelmsford Garden Community, taking us up to our 134,600 homes. Some of you may have read that Uttlesford and North Essex have very recently encountered issues with the process of delivering a local plan, and these issues are being investigated by MHCLG. But nevertheless, we continue to have the largest number of proposed homes officially recognised by government in a single LEP area under our extended Garden Communities programme. We believe that our Housing and Development Group, our HDGs, provide a very good platform to bring together colleagues from the garden communities across CELEP. These HDGs provide the only forums where garden communities in the CELEP area can share learning and best practice with each other. And really, I think, Brian, that's what I wanted to say just in terms of my opening remarks. Just to leave you with the message that CELEP is a big player. It's very important to us. And as far as we are concerned in CELEP, we want to try and promote housing and jobs to the best of our ability. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. And moving on now to Nick Fenton, Chair of Kent Developers Group. Hoping, Nick, you can give us a developer's perspective on what's been happening since COVID-19 and also what you'd like to see happening as we come out of COVID-19, particularly with a focus on garden communities. So over to you, Nick.
Thank you, Brian. Kent Developers Group originally set up to provide jobs throughout Kent and Medway. It was there to encourage commercial development. It now looks after and helps with all of the developers right across Kent and Medway. That's including housing developers, people looking to build commercial space, retailers and everything else. So membership includes the Environment Agency, Natural England, Homes England. All of these people are in the room with the developers so that we can actually make sure we get rid of the barriers and try to bring development forward. So the important thing as far as the COVID-19 situation occurred, an important thing to recognise is that we went from a position of a very strong demand out there looking to buy homes into a complete shutdown almost overnight. Developers were looking to protect their cash. Some tried to continue to build as develop on with their schemes, but many of them furloughed a lot of their staff, which was a great opportunity for them at the time. They were looking to defer land purchase, not cancel, just defer, because obviously they're looking to see what's going to happen and where they're going to go take it forward. Those that tried to continue, then they started suffering with material shortages and utilities not being able to perform. Some of the utility companies looking to bring people from the north into the southeast were looking for hotels, and there were no hotel opportunities. So straight away they were struggling to keep things going. And locals were objecting. They were wondering why they're being told, and this was due to probably the mixed message that was coming out of government. Developers were trying to keep going and trying to develop, but they were getting outside issues stopping them. Mortgages also became an issue. The RSCS guidance basically said no more valuations, no more visiting properties. We also had a situation whereby the loan to value that most of the mortgage companies were looking for was much greater than we all thought. But interestingly, sales continued, not at the volume that we had previously seen, but they did continue. People continued to buy homes right across the patch. So we've now looking to return to work. We're trying to get people going again. It's fair to say that majority of developers, in my view, will be finishing houses off, not building new, so they probably won't be digging new foundations. And this is probably shown quite clearly in the fact that the shortages in materials exist with the finishing trades, plaster, wood, underline. And we've just seen recently, or just today rather, that the brick manufacturers are looking to make redundancies across and cut back on production. So there's a good indication of what's actually going to happen. But it is important to recognise that this was very different to 2008, which was caused by a financial situation. Most of the developers probably don't have much stock either, unsold stock. Most of the units that are under construction at the moment are probably sold. Some will be contracted, so they can go back and invest a small amount of money, but get their money back overall on the other units, which makes a lot of sense. Sales areas are opening up as well, so it's interesting to see how that's going to respond and see how it goes. But we now are starting to see an element of cancellations, and we've got to make sure the consumer confidence is maintained. Help to Buy certainly suffered when the loan to values from mortgage companies was cut back, but now that's been resolved and we're now back with Help to Buy as a sales tool. So how do we go forward? What's the aid to recovery? Well, almost immediately we had meetings with our local planners in the area, both in Kent, Essex, and in East Sussex, to make sure that they can continue. And it's fair to say that we probably missed a few committees over March. But we've quickly got them going, and we got back into virtual committees and looking to see what we can do to assist as best we can. We also had weekly meetings with MHCLG and Homes England, and we sent a letter into the Secretary of State, which has been acknowledged. And we've had regular discussions to make sure that we can push and make sure we're coming out the other side fully functional. I'm not going to go through all of the points raised within the issue, but we will make it available to everybody going forward. But certainly we were looking at the planning function, make sure that continues, looking to extend on planning applications where they might run out, looking to defer, not cancel necessarily, but defer Section 106 payments, especially when they were linked to triggers. As opposed to linked to dates as opposed to triggers. So it should be more down to the number of units not actually being paid out by a certain date, because we've lost productivity of 3 to 6 months without any issue at all. So we're also looking to encourage the RPs back to develop. At the moment, they're probably in the same situation as most of the other developers, but we need to get those guys going. But most importantly, we need to support the subcontractors and the SMEs. Because many of those guys have not had any real assistance from government. So we need to see what we can do to help those and get material procurement back in and the utility companies performing so that we can actually finish off these homes and get homes built. The sales process, we're looking at that as well to try and see how we can address that and see what other measures we can bring in. RSCS valuations are now back up and running, so that's great news. Going forward, I think we can see this as an opportunity. I think that's the most important thing from my perspective, to look to find ways to do things differently, to actually make things happen. Joint working with partnerships between the public and private sector is certainly one, and that could certainly assist the SMEs, because without that support, I'm afraid that we might see them being decimated a little bit. But it's important that we maintain quality, we get the infrastructure in, that we talk about homes at the same time and with the same amount of encouragement towards infrastructure and jobs, and that's how these garden communities will be delivered.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you very much indeed. So if we can move on now to Andrew, and Andrew, hopefully you can give us a developers and investors perspective in what will make our garden community successful, with potentially a focus on some of the infrastructure requirements as well.
Thank you, Brian. Yeah, so just to start with, so Countryside Properties is a house builder and placemaker across England, and for the last 6 years or so been focusing on the larger urban extensions and new settlements, but also urban regeneration, developing brownfield sites or developing or redeveloping estates across the country as well. So a range of experience. In terms of garden communities and new developments, I think one of the key things, Brian, you said there is that infrastructure, and that is key to the success. I mean, there is a question already popped up in terms of sustainable locations, And it's not necessarily the case that existing sites are always sustainable, but actually it's about looking at the investment that can come into an area, building on the existing links, and using the development investment, as well as, yes, investment from other public bodies to ensure the necessary links are put in there to ensure a development is sustainable. But again, it's not just about housing. From a countryside perspective, we focus on the delivery of the social infrastructure as well, whether that's open spaces, schools, community facilities, and also the employment, another key aspect of garden communities that we need to remember. So whether that's linking the employment closely to the new housing and the new social facilities, and thinking about that whole and the delivery of a balanced community going forward. But from our perspective, thinking about that long term, that's the certainty that developers are looking for. We are looking at sites that will be delivering 10, 15, 20 years time. And that provides certainty for us in terms of investment, certainty in terms of certainly the local authorities thinking about their housing numbers. But from our perspective, allows us to invest and bring forward that quality development. Because if you can invest in that, you understand the pipeline of development coming forward, you can afford to invest in the quality of the infrastructure, the quality of the green environment and the blue environment, to ensure that the place is actually where people want to come to. And those first few phases really set the tone for the development going forward. But I think there's a few key things that are really successful in terms of garden communities, or are key to make them successful. One is the leadership from the local community, from the district or borough council, thinking about exactly what they want and setting that vision. Yes, there's a leadership role for the developers as well, but we need that local certainty. There is the engagement clearly with local communities and all the local stakeholders. And that's not just with the existing people that own houses in the locality. It's thinking broader than that, engaging with those communities that don't have a voice normally in the process. But ensuring that the local councils have the capacity to deliver these schemes. As Fionnuala may very well say, she works with many councils across the country to bring a little bit more capacity and to support and guide, because many councils certainly don't have lots of these garden communities on their doorstep, and they might be approaching these for the first time. But that certainty I mentioned earlier, that's key. Certainty of a political process, certainty of a local plan process, and Chris mentioned a couple of local plans a few moments ago, and that's really problematic. We need that certainty, and councils need that certainty, that thinking big, thinking about that strategic planning properly, whether that's cross-border, whether that's joint council working, that will be supported through the local plan process. We need to ensure that the local plan process is, yes, probably changed. Mentioned CLG there, MHCLG, making sure that local plan process is changed and updated to ensure that councils that are wanting to have that vision can ensure that they can take it forward and deliver. We need to make sure that we have those balanced communities, thinking about that mixed tenure approach. Yes, the market housing certainly, but the affordable housing, the private rented sector, the key worker housing, that whole range of tenures there to ensure we have a proper, sustainable and balanced community. But thinking about, right at the start, thinking about the stewardship and how we will ensure that those communities are going to be maintained to that quality level going forward. But yes, from a developer's perspective, really keen to see these develop and come forward across the geographies we're talking about here and broader, to ensure that we can provide the necessary homes for our communities that are needed. Thanks, Brian.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, Andrew. And there's always a question coming in about the North Essex planning element, and we'll come back to that when we go to questions later on. So, Kevin from Ebbsfleet, I think we're going to ask you to give a perspective on the vision for Ebbsfleet, and again in this what the new normal is, how COVID may be impacting on your thoughts there. So over to you, Kevin.
Thank you, Brian. Just to put in context for people who don't know where Ebbsfleet is, we're the first new garden city for 100 years, the first new town for 50 years. We're built on the route of High Speed 1, where London meets the Garden of England, basically on the edge of Kent, the edge of the M25. We're sandwiched between the A2 and the Thames. We're a brownfield site. The new town has been built on former chalk quarries. between Dartford and Gravesham, but also embracing the existing towns of Swanscombe and Northfleet. So very much a very different and exciting opportunity for building a new place in a very existing context, and a very sustainable, arguably one of the most sustainable locations in the country. Our ambition there is to build in this really great location that we have to deliver up to 15,000 homes, and very importantly, the potential for 30,000 jobs in the Garden City as well, together with a full range of infrastructure to serve that Garden City, including 7 new city parks measuring 192 hectares of strategic green space. As Brian said, I work for the Ebbsfleet Development Corporation. We were set up in 2015 to try and facilitate and coordinate development in the Garden City, working with developers, local authorities, including people like Andrew, to try and facilitate and deliver this Garden City quicker, to a higher level of ambition, and to maintain a very high quality in that place over a long period of time. I'm glad to say just before the COVID crisis hit, we just reached our 2000th home and our 2000th family moved in. So we're making really good progress on the site. As a development corporation, we've had the task, I guess, to try and interpret what a Garden City means in our local context. And I guess that's part of our understanding today. Garden City isn't just any development. It does have a higher level of ambition. It is built on the original Garden City principles, so pretty much more emphasis on the people who live there, about the sense of community, about the balance of homes and jobs, and then access to green infrastructure. So it's very, very important that we don't just see it as house building. It is about placemaking. And again, we've heard that before, other commentators. Also, quite helpfully in this context of post-COVID, we were also the largest of the Healthy New Town pilot projects. And that meant that we spent the last 3 years working with NHS England, our local CCG and Kent County Council and others, to try and think about how we design in healthier behaviours and healthier lifestyles into the Garden City. And that's both in terms of the built environment we're building, but also what it's like to live here, and working with communities to try and help them have healthier lifestyles and healthier behaviours in the place. And I think that's put us in good stead to think about how we respond post-COVID in that context. What we've learned post-COVID is that development is still ongoing. We had a brief pause with developers. However, they're all now back on site. It means to see how the speed of that goes moving forward, because our ambition is to get up to 1,000 homes a year, which is obviously very ambitious indeed. We feel as a development corporation we're well placed to support that development. Just before the COVID crisis, again at the end of last year, we became a major landowner in the Garden City, so we now own the central area, which includes capacity for 4,000 homes and up to 30,000 jobs. That means we can work much more comprehensively. We can take and share risk with developer partners. We can bring forward development quicker than the market might necessarily do itself. And again, as Nick just mentioned, we can support some of those SME house builders in some of the specialist kinds of housing products, such as supported housing, custom built housing, and other things that the market wouldn't be doing necessarily on its own. So I think we can, as a development corporation, really try and help and stimulate partnership working moving forward. What's very important for us, though, is to make sure we work with the community. And obviously, one of the things in the current situation is how we genuinely work in a co-production process with people. And we need to understand what people want at the minute and post-COVID. We are in the process at the minute of having a SurveyMonkey analysis with our local residents. We've had a fantastic response to this. We call it our Learning from Lockdown survey. And we're asking people really what they feel about the current situation and what they're learning about themselves, what they're learning about their neighbourhoods, and how they'd like to see us change planning and change maybe how we work with our developers in the future. So over the next couple of weeks, we'll be getting really good analysis from people genuinely telling us what they'd like to see us rethink in placemaking moving forward. So initial thoughts coming from that are about working from home more, about making sure we bring development forward in terms of community infrastructure, making sure the parks come early on rather than later on in the development, so people have things to do and places to go early on in the process. So again, we'll be happy to share that with people once that analysis comes through. But in conclusion for me, I'm really saying that I think the Garden City principles and our Healthy New Town principles have really put us in good stead to respond post-COVID. I think we've already been thinking about the importance of health. It's primarily in people's mind now about how their home works for them, how their neighbourhood works for them. And I think people are going to be much more demanding in the future. So we really need to make sure that we improve quality and improve responding to their needs in the future. And I think it really reinforces the importance of that long-term placemaking developer role. The thing about garden communities, they're not just about development and moving on. It's about a development that's there for a long time. It's about a great place with good stewardship and governance. So I think it's a really great time. The garden communities are well placed to respond to this crisis.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, Kevin. Thank you for that. And on a similar note, Guy, your mission, should you wish to accept it, is to tell us about Harlow and Gilston and where your thinking is as well post going forward out of COVID. So over to you, Guy.
Thank you, Brian. Mission accepted. And it will now self-destruct, I think. I've got 5 minutes, haven't I, or something? Isn't that how it works? Yeah. Sorry, on a serious note, Harlow and Gilston Garden Town is not actually a brownfield site initiative. It's already home to in the order of 90,000 or so people, and quite a kind of sort of thriving local economy. Where there are some significant employers, and indeed some significant employers who are planning to come to the particular area. So already we're dealing with a community that has ownership, that this is their home, for some it's their place of work. And of course that brings with it passions. It also happens to be one of the original, in fact I think almost the first actually, new town that was built. It was started in 1949, Harlow New Town, and that forms the centre to the Garden Town Initiative. All of us as a group of partners, and there are 5 local authorities involved in this, 3 district councils and 2 county councils, and who are collaborating. They came together some time ago. They brought me on board to give them a common sense of direction and to set about bringing and convening everybody together to bring forward the initiative itself. The policy that was sort of originally crafted and that still stands today is looking at the creation of 23,000 homes over the next 10 to 15 years or so. It's looking at a complete redesign of the local transport network and creating a kind of zero emission active travel led transport system within the area. It includes the creation of 4 new neighbourhoods, 4 new garden communities. It embraces 2 enterprise zones, and indeed the town centre itself. All of these places require regeneration, and I think that's the word, Brian, that we're using more than perhaps anything else. This is regeneration. I think Andy mentioned something around holistic regeneration, as did Kevin, and that's something that very much sits at the centre of the garden community that is coming forward in Harlow and Gilston. Also, just to kind of finish on this, the policy and this holistic regeneration approach really does sort of embrace a very, very broad portfolio, quite appropriately. I've mentioned things like enterprise zones, I've mentioned the town centre, but not unsurprisingly, the wider economy piece sits in there as part of the growth agenda and the placemaking proposition, as does health and well-being of a community, as does arts and culture and the economy created around those particular social activities. With it also comes an endowment proposition. And what we're looking at very, very, very carefully here is sort of looking at not just the future of stewardship and ownership of these, not just new neighbourhoods, but also the one that's currently there, but also what that endowment is. And that really also sits at the heart of what it is that we're kind of leading on, which is community engagement, community being part of this change. With 90,000 people living there, it is incredibly important that all of us who are making that investment into Harlow and Gilston can feel reassured and confident that what we've got here are 90,000 people who feel that they have a sense of ownership about what it is that's happening around them, and that they feel part of that change rather than having that change imposed upon them, which I think we all recognise professionally can lead to some very, very challenging times and circumstances. So a very thoughtful approach. We're looking at kind of how, for example, an investment into a new hospital, which may indeed take it out of the town, can be replaced by a network of community, voluntary sector and primary healthcare hubs, bringing together activities at a very, very local level in both new neighbourhoods and existing neighbourhoods. So it's quite a sophisticated and broad portfolio of thought that's been applied. And what's COVID kind of gone and done to all of this? Actually, it's accelerated our plans to bring forward what we're calling a combined delivery service. That combined delivery service is an entity that is not fettered by planning. It's not fettered by public sector. And it is a blend of public and private, and it enables us to deploy the boots on the ground to bring about the development that's required, the infrastructure that's required to give us those skill sets and those capacities. It's council backed, it's council owned. So what this is really effectively doing is creating a shared delivery service. It's not just between public and private, but between local authorities too. And it's that we look towards colleagues in government and indeed Homes England to kind of sort of come along and support alongside us. So that has enabled us to kind of in fact, the COVID period has enabled us just to expand on that, to start exploring that further, to put together the legalities and the constitutional arrangements. Teams have been working on that. Home working has been actually a little bit of a blessing. We found that we're working at a higher level of productivity than we were pre-COVID, and that in turn has just led to our own challenges about HR and not burning out. But on that, Brian, I'll finish, and thank you very much.
Perfect. I was just going to send you a little note, so you just got me perfect timing, so thank you. Others have had their little notes, and they know who they are. So Fionnuala, welcome. We didn't manage to speak before the call, but what we'd like ideally from you as a perspective from Homes England and the garden communities, what you see as the opportunities and what success might look like in those going forward in this post-COVID world. So over to you, Fionnuala. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. And I look out for one of your little notes. Yes, I'm head of delivery of garden communities at Homes England. We're delivering the programme, the Garden Communities programme, on behalf of the Ministry and working closely with them. But just to start off by reminding people, Homes England is the government's accelerator on housing issues, and we want to drive positive market change, unlock land for development where the market won't, and generally improve neighbourhoods and help grow communities. That's our core business. And we clearly recognise with COVID the huge impact that is having on our partners and suppliers and their workforces. We're working very closely with our partners in both the public and the private sector to understand the impact of COVID on those and to help us think through that, plus analyse market data to understand where we can best position ourselves to help partners move forward as we come out of the COVID crisis and back to some kind of normality. We're not underestimating the scale of the challenge. Equally, we're not rushing to very quick decisions in terms of that strategy, because we need to make sure we've got the right approach. And saying that, we're still open for business and we're still levering in funding where we can and helping developments strike forward in terms of building a sustainable pipeline for the future of housing supply. So against that background, garden communities, big scale developments that have quality at their heart, they're part and parcel of what we want to support. They're an important component of the government's housing targets, and increasingly having an increasing focus on them as a key element of that delivery strategy. We support the 49 garden communities that are part of the programme in different ways. Through our critical friend approach, we lever in capacity funding to local authorities, given the additional work that they need to undertake to help deliver them. And we also provide investment and have acquired land in some of the garden communities where that helps move things forward. So we bring the full range of our opportunities to the fore to work with partners to help deliver those local ambitions. But we're not underestimating the challenges of them, which have come to the fore, particularly in recent times with some of the more ambitious garden communities. And we're also working closely with the Ministry to unpick that and understand how perhaps very large scale developments, whether they're part of the programme or not, can be better supported via the planning system moving forward. That's such a huge challenge at the moment. So we're supportive of these projects. We will continue to work with them to make sure they happen. In terms of the opportunities, any large scale ambition, like a garden community, it has to be a marriage of ambition and delivery. One won't work without the other. And we see ourselves in that space in helping make that match work better. So through the expertise that we offer, and bear in mind that at Homes England, we're also acting as master developer in a number of projects like Northstowe, Burgess Hill. So we've got direct in this. Large projects, they offer such fantastic opportunities because of their long-term nature and their size, in terms of addressing climate change, in terms of improving design for communities, in terms of leaving a very positive legacy from development. And we're using all of those at the moment to harness activity and make sure that they continue to deliver on the ambition that was behind the programme when it started. So I think I'll just leave it at that, and perhaps pick up some of the questions that I see coming through in the chat function.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Fionnuala. And yeah, and we do have a number of questions. In these, when you run webinars like this, you often have some pre-prepared ones, but on the basis of whether you get the engagement. But I think we can. I'm going to start with the questions coming in from the delegates on the call. The first one I'd like to take is a question about the impact of COVID, the COVID crisis, and whether that's changed attitudes and thinking on the balance of homes and employment and space in the new town. So is there, does COVID express the need for a different mix potentially between homes and employment space? I'm going to go to our planner first, if that's okay, Andrew, to see if you've got a view on this, and then maybe pick up views from Kevin and Guy as representatives of the garden communities. So Andrew, please.
Thanks. Well, I suppose it's a really interesting question, and I suppose my simplistic answer is I don't know. I don't think anybody will know for quite a while. Everyone's been talking about, it's quite nice working at home, potentially, depending on whether your kids burst in at certain inappropriate times or how good the broadband is. But actually, people also want to go out to meet with people and engage with people. So I think there is a debate and discussion, and we've already had it with some councils about, this employment study was completed before the current crisis, and we'll need to update it and think about the different types of employment. Will we need fewer office spaces, for example? Will we need to ensure that we have the 15-minute neighbourhoods, so we have a larger range of retail facilities in that easy walking distance, which might also include cafes with good Wi-Fi, so that actually people could nip out and go there if they wanted to rather than work at home. So I think it's a bit early to understand, but it's not just about specific employment space. It's also about thinking about the configuration of houses. We've started a thought process internally about, what does that mean? What will customers want? Will they want, a couple of extra small box rooms or something where you can shut the door and you can have your meeting, because not everyone has a study, and actually there's been a trend for more open plan houses over many years, or perhaps that's not quite so helpful if you've there's two people at home working and you need to have some quiet space. So I think there's a whole range of different thought processes to go through, and we won't know for quite a while. We won't know certainly on the customer expectations and wishes, and we won't know certainly in terms of employment for quite a while until things settle down. So the challenge is what we do in the intervening period. But I still think there'll always be a demand for that proper mixed community of the employment and the housing coming together.
Andrew, thank you. And Kevin, any thoughts from Ebbsfleet?
Well, I guess one of our issues at Ebbsfleet is a lower ambition is for 2 jobs per home eventually. In the early days, most of the workers, or as a high percentage, commuting to London. And obviously the 17-minute commute to London is one of the real attractions of being in Ebbsfleet, so we need to make sure that's up and running and workable as soon as possible. But again, picking on the last point as well, I think from our learning from lockdown survey, we're starting to find that people are thinking about, are their homes working for them, working from home? So again, people wanting more compartmentation, thinking about noise transmission, thinking about natural light and ventilation in the place that you're working. So it's not just a little corner in a room that you're going to use once in a blue moon. I think people genuinely be looking for a better space that's more integral to the house moving forward. I also think people will be looking at opportunities in their neighbourhood for home working. So again, we're all probably finding everyone's going nuts in their own house home working. So I think the opportunity to go somewhere, work in a community building or a cafe or something to also work from home is also really important. So it's not just home working, it's working from a home environment or a neighbourhood environment, but also we have to be really, really focused on how we get commuting back working again. We can do it by cycling and walking, but again, in our situation, because so many people commute to London, we need that connection to work for us.
That's very helpful. And Guy?
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Thank you. Just sort of briefly on this, I think Andy's points about it just being perhaps a little bit too early to tell what the longer term kind of shift or change may bring, I think is well said. There's just a couple of things, though, that one has sort of kind of observed in the very immediate future. And actually, what's quite interesting is it comes back to purposes of town centres, high streets. In other words, what happens around the corner with the proverbial corner shop, for example. So at a very basic and fundamental level, there are two themes that have come out very clearly from what we're all currently experiencing and hopefully working our way out of currently, the current pandemic, one of which is well-being at a very local level, in a very meaningful level. So that's about lifestyle, what that lifestyle is like, being as healthy as possible, being active as possible, just from a very personal perspective. And the other is this business about, as I said, the local corner shop on the high street. And it has almost got to that. Now, that's not to say that supermarkets aren't important. They are, as part of that kind of employment landscape, as part of that retail kind of infrastructure. But actually what's been very interesting is how those smaller businesses have responded and the place that they have taken back in their local neighborhoods. Yes, they're using the internet to market more widely. And I think that leads me to my final sort of kind of point, which is about digital infrastructure and this business of connectivity and communication, which is as much to do with socializing and cultural kind of aspects of life as it is to do with business, commerce and the economy and making a living. Thanks, Brian.
No, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for that. Now, I have a question specifically for Fionnuala, and it's one that you probably can't answer, so it's unfair, but I'm going to pose it anyway, because in the nature of just mixing things up a little bit. And it's from Roland Brass, who says, any idea when the next Garden Communities Call for Sites prospectus from MHG will be issued? We need more strategic sites to meet housing targets. So I know that you're not able to make ministerial announcements, but you could maybe give us a nod or the wink, and we promise not to tell anyone, even though it's going to be on YouTube. So over to you, Fionnuala.
The last prospectus was issued just under 2 years ago and was incredibly popular. We'd over 100 bids made to the ministry to become part of the programme. So clearly there is a huge appetite out there to be branded as a government garden community effectively, and also the support package that goes with it. It's fair to say we're taking stock with the ministry at the moment about the future. Last year we took on board 26 new projects, which was quite a significant cohort to onboard. I'm afraid I don't have any news at this point in time about whether there'll be a future prospectus or not. But certainly, if there is any news, you'll be the first to know.
Thank you very much. And Stephen Boxall asks, how many garden communities are in sustainable locations? Now, from my understanding, the government's recognised, I think, 49 communities. 9 of those are within the South East Lep area, an area that I work within with Chris and some others on the call. But we've got Kevin and Guy from 2 garden communities, both in the South East. So let's put it to Kevin and Guy initially. Are your garden communities in sustainable locations? And we start with Kevin.
Yeah, I think that was part of the special opportunity of Ebbsfleet. It is in a brownfield site it is based on existing infrastructure. We have got the high-speed link to London, but we've also got very good local networks, both rail, road and bus networks. We can improve on them. So yeah, I would say we are in a sustainable location, and that much makes the opportunity for garden community much easier than when you're not on such a location.
Thank you. Guy?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Yes and no. Yes, we're in a sustainable location, but not yet. Not if we're going to see a community grow by 23,000 new homes and an increase in jobs of, say, we hope, in the order of 15 to 30,000 over the next 10 years. But that's the whole point of the project. Is what I'd say, Brian, is that actually what's going on here is that we have a core sustainable offer, and it must grow as the numbers of people living and working in said community also increase. And that's exactly what our kind of approach to the entire project is. So we're capitalizing on the opportunity that we've got, and sustainability sits at the heart of this GT. Thanks, Brian.
No, brilliant. Thank you for that. Now, I've got a number of colleagues on the call that have gone back to that planning point exemplified in the CLEP area by, I think, Uttlesford and North Essex. And there are sensitivities around those. But I just wondered, maybe, Andrew, to come back to that, what threats there are to our garden community's ambitions from the current local plan making process, and then I'll open it up across the speakers if they've got any views really on how we should be responding to that. So Andrew, initially.
Thank you. I better declare a couple of interests. So obviously was head of planning for Uttlesford, and I still live there, and Countryside has an interest in West of Braintree, so one of the ones that the inspector has made an error of judgment upon. It's quite interesting, and Ashley's comment and Julie's comment pick up a couple of these key issues. Ashley is quite right that garden communities are not the entire answer and cannot be with a balanced local plan. A balanced local plan has to ensure development, across the area, responding to the needs of the different market areas and different communities, but also ensure that you have your fibre land supply, which you can't generally make up purely with a garden community by itself. So you have to have the smaller range of development as well to ensure that you are keeping development moving in some of the other communities. But actually what the garden community does, and what I was saying earlier in terms of why we like them, is it provides a backbone of development over many plan periods, and something you can rely on, as well as having the smaller scale extensions to villages and towns going on as well. Which actually, talking about sustainability, are probably quite important for the sustainability of some small communities. The actually extra 50, 100 houses sometimes helps to sustain the shop, helps to sustain the pub or the school and those facilities in smaller places. But this is a real issue for planning, strategic planning, this issue that the inspectors raised. You are never going to have the certainty of a 30, 40-year project all tied up before the project starts at a local plan examination stage. It's bonkers, because it's just not going to happen. You have to have this, a level of certainty and a level of clarity. But the only thing that's going to be certain is that things will change. Government funding is in 5-year tranches, and if you're going through Highways England for any funding, you're talking about 5-year tranches of investment. So you can't guarantee something that might be necessary in 10, 15, 20 years time. And the local plan system will have to change to take that into account. Otherwise, we just won't have councils wanting to take on this sort of strategic nature planning, which is a crying shame, because that's what we should be doing. We should be planning positively for these new communities and sensibly cross-border areas, and looking at the sustainable locations. Guy's site is a perfect example. We've got 3 councils working together, cross-boundary, cross-county boundary as well, to bring forward that community. And that's a perfect example of the councils coming together to plan strategically. And we can't have that stopped by a local plan system that's not really currently fit for purpose.
Thank you, Andrew. So I'm going to open that up to all the speakers. Is there anyone else that wants to come in on that issue?
I'd like to come in.
Another, please, yeah.
Clearly, anything of the scale of a new settlement, it takes time to plan and deliver. You're not going to do that in one local plan cycle. And I think that's where some of the challenges arise, that long-term nature, and at what stage is there enough certainty to put them into a local plan. Against some of the recent decisions, it's important to, or recent letters from PINs on local plans that have garden communities in as part of them. It's important to remember there are other garden communities that have successfully navigated the local plan system, such as St Cuthbert's up at Carlisle, Long Marston, and indeed the Gilston element of Harlow and Gilston garden town. So it's important to remember that there is that balance there, and that some large-scale growth does still navigate the system successfully. I think the other issue that is raised is that choreography of investment in strategic infrastructure and strategic housing and how that works. Clearly, in the case of North Essex, there were a number of successful, substantial HIF bids, but clearly the issue of strategic infrastructure and housing delivery still wasn't satisfactorily addressed in the inspector's eyes. So a lot of interesting challenges is raised that will take a time to unpick and understand how we can perhaps better move forward.
Thank you for that. Now, I've got to share an apology. There's a number of questions that I've not been able to get to, and my apologies for that. And please, there's some really great questions that if we had more time would have liked to have got to. So I think that's something we've got to take away, and I think there are some thoughts that we might want to do some further events like this between the sponsor organisation. So we'll take those offline and see what we can do. What I want to now do, though, as we come towards the end of the webinar, is just work my way back around the speakers. Not everyone, I've not brought everyone in on questions, but just to see if there are final comments colleagues want to make. So I'm going to take them in the order of the original contribution. So Chris, was there anything else you'd like to share with colleagues?
Just this question of how life may change after COVID-19. I mean, I agree with the general sentiment that it's far too early to say. However, there have been a number of surveys done by particularly analysts in the city as to looking at the future, for example, of commercial property and offices in the centre of town and how that may be affected by COVID. And the initial responses are quite interesting that these surveys have covered. That is that up to between 35 and 40% of the respondents to the surveys have said that they do expect that their working life will change, and they do expect that they will spend more time at home working. And that, of course, if that's right, and if those things are borne out in reality, don't forget we've only been in this for 3 or 4 months so far, so how things will change, we don't know. But if that is right, then that will have extreme implications for commercial property, for transportation, but in particular for connectivity, which we're all battling with today. So infrastructure, particularly internet broadband, will be, whatever happens, will be incredibly important. And also things like home shopping, deliveries, etc., will become much more important. So although we don't know, we can see trends already emerging, which do have implications for the way that we actually manage garden communities going forward. And I think what I think is that garden communities will be very important. That we can expect perhaps people to spend more time in garden communities, and that if you're an investor, you might want to be short commercial office space in the city. I think that there will be some trends that I think will perpetuate. So I just wanted to end up by saying that we at CELEP are very committed to supporting our garden communities, so in particular to supporting infrastructure of all types. And making sure that they do actually support jobs and growth, economic growth, which is what most of us want. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Nick?
Garden communities, large schemes are very, very important. There's no doubt about it. They're necessary for a little bit of catch up because we're already behind on housing numbers. But we mustn't play the numbers game, which is so easily done. It takes a lot of time to get garden communities up and running. It takes a lot of time to get them delivered, and many of them will have different drivers. whether it be land value or housing numbers or whatever. But we've got to treat it as a way to get additional homes delivered, but it's got to be good quality development going forward as well. But we mustn't forget the SMEs, and we must be very careful about that. Addressing one of the questions that has popped up there about modular homes, I think productivity on sites will change completely. Before we would have 5, 7, 8 people in a property at once. Now we're struggling to get a bricklaying gang together up on the scaffolding. We're probably going to have one guy upstairs and one guy downstairs for quite some time. So I think MMC, modern methods of construction, will certainly start to come forward. The thing that stops it now is cost. Developers build homes, tier 1 developers build homes very, very cheaply, and we don't have the throughput through the MMC outputs to actually deliver at that cost. So we've got to be careful on that. I'm also a board member of Locating Kent, and I can tell you that we are getting a lot of people who are basically saying they don't want to go back to the office, don't want to go back to London. And there's a lot of people also looking for commercial space and homes out in Kent who want to move out of London. So I think it's going to completely change the way that we do things. And we've got to be fast afoot to make sure we're sort of right on top of that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nick. I think those important points. And Andrew.
Thanks. Just very briefly, from a countryside perspective, in terms of the garden communities, it's thinking about the certainty that we can get from the local authorities, the clarity of that leadership, but also thinking about the capacity within the local authorities. So it's not just money, but having the necessary staff with the experience to be able to work through that. And picking up a couple of the comments or the questions that have come through, it's a collaborative exercise. It's not the council doing it, or it's not the developers doing it. It's a collective working together with the existing or new communities as well. And actually, that's when you're going to have and ensure the quality as well as speed of delivery, but ensure that both those things are going hand in hand through the development.
Thank you very much. And Kevin.
Yeah, I think although it's like it's early days, I think it's pretty clear that people are being much more conscious about their health and about getting the balance right between health and work-life balance, the importance of family and things like that. So people will be more demanding in their place and in their homes in the future. I think if you reflect back on the Garden City principles, I'm not going to go through them in detail, but looking at them today, you could write them for today, even though they're 120 years old. So compact, walkable neighbourhoods, access to green space, work-life balance, access to jobs, it could be a complete response to what we've been talking about today post-COVID. Picking up one of the questions there, is there a conflict between public bodies and working with this sector? I think absolutely not. I think public-private sector working together is a way of sharing risk, making sure we can actually get the quality and the ambition together. And I think really, garden cities aren't the whole solution, but they're certainly an integral part of the solution post-COVID.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And Guy.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks. Brian, I just thought I'd questions from the Q&A kind of chat bar thing. And there was one from Josh Dudley talking about ecological sustainability and can garden towns contribute to that? My answer to that is yes. And then, Josh, you go on to talk about can garden towns bring forward ecological services? Not sure what you mean by that, but if you send them into chairman@hggt.co.uk, perhaps we can have a further conversation. But on a serious note, just around the environment and environmental sustainability and open spaces. I mentioned well-being being some of this, one of those things that has come out of the whole COVID-19 experience. Well-being of communities and residents and individuals within a community. And our environment has played an important role on that. I think I cannot begin to kind of sort of recall the number of times that I've been listening to the radio or listening to the news on television or to some other general talk program where people are talking about rediscovering open spaces and how important that's been for their mental health and their well-being going forward. And clearly at the middle of garden communities must fit that well-being offer. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you so much. And Fionnuala.
Very briefly, garden communities are well placed to create great places in a post-COVID world, to play to all of the issues that have come up over the last few months, access to local facilities, public realm, green space, neighbourhood, etc. Homes England are here to work with the public and the private sector to make these ambitions as deliverable as we can.
Thank you very much indeed. And I'm conscious we're starting to lose participants because we're right up to time, but I wanted to thank all our speakers that have been involved. Thank our sponsors, CLEP, Kent Developers Group and Essex Developers Group. Pick up the point that I think that there's probably more to do on this, and we'll look at how we can engage with colleagues on that, and pass back to Bonnie.
Thanks, Brian, and thank you to the panel. It's been a really interesting and I think very apt conversation. This is the last session as part of Real Estate Live UK today, but tomorrow, because we can do that in this new world, we're going up north. So first thing tomorrow morning, we are having a panel about the Northern Powerhouse, and then after that we're going even further north with a panel hosted by Scotland. Then if you're interested more in the southeast region of England, we've got sessions with Waltham Forest, West London, Aldgate and Croydon still to come this week, and some interesting discussions, including one about the future of learning and higher and further education and how that might change post COVID-19. So lots more to see. Have a look at the Real Estate Live website for more details, and hopefully we'll see you in another one of these sessions or in a Building Garden Communities for the Future session in the near future. As Brian alluded, there'll be more to come from this too. Thank you all and see you soon.